Big Apple Blitz with Anthony Rivardo and Matt O'Leary.
Hello and welcome into another episode of Big Apple Blitz. What is going on? I am Matt O'Leary, joined as always by my co-host, Anthony Rivardo. Anthony, what's going on, my friend?
Not much, man. Just getting excited for the NFL Scouting Combine kicking off this week. And I think one of the main takeaways that we're going to get from this, I know we'll hear a lot of conversations about different prospects, who's doing the drills, who's not doing the drills. But really one of the big things that happens at the Combine is related to free agency. This is the first time where GMs and player representatives can get into one place and start negotiating and having conversations about those contracts. So it's going to be a really exciting week. We're going to hear a lot of news, and it's going to tie into free agency beginning in only a couple weeks here.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you nailed it. Obviously, getting some stories coming out of who's participating in what, who's going to throw, who's not going to throw. But with all the NFL GMs in one spot, and about half the league sends their head coaches too. So you get all NFL people in one enclosed area. Sometimes you see some trades start to leak through and some rumors. It's a good time for people like us who cover the NFL and put out content. So I agree. I'm right there with you. I'm excited to get into it, which is why today I think it'll be fun to go through for both these teams, maybe some cut candidates, because leading up into free agency, we'll get into later in the show how the NFL salary cap had a more dramatic increase than we originally anticipated. But teams are always looking to find more ways to get even more cap space. And for both these teams, there, I think anyway, some obvious cut candidates for both sides.
Definitely. And we'll talk more about free agency and how the Giants can set themselves up for free agency, who they might be re-signing, maybe not re-signing, maybe letting somebody walk. But the pre-free agency process where they're cutting players and they're deciding who they're going to extend, which contracts they're going to restructure. That's almost the most important aspect of this whole process, because without that kind of house cleaning, you can't really set yourself up for success in the offseason.
Absolutely. So how about we start rolling with the New York Giants? Who's someone that jumps out to you that could be a potential cut candidate?
Yeah, number one off the board is Mark Lewinsky. He's been with the team for, I believe, 2 seasons now, and it has not been a great time for him in New York. I mean, he was signed to be the starting right guard for the New York Giants, and he's pretty rapidly been taken out of the starting lineup. He's been banged up at times, but when he's on the field, he's among the worst offensive guards in the NFL. So cutting him, the New York Giants can save $5.6 million in salary cap space. It's a no-brainer decision. There's no way that they're going to carry Mark Lewinsky into the 2024 season with a $7.2 million cap hit. He barely played for them last year. They benched him because he was so bad. So they're not going to keep him on this team. They're just going to cut him, release him to free agency, and hopefully try and find his replacement at the top of the market.
Yeah, that was kind of the follow-up for me, because I agree with you. I think looking at, the Giants side of things, that why would you hold on to someone who maybe at best for your team would be a backup with a $7 million cap hit? That doesn't really make a lot of sense, especially at his age too, right? At 32, kind of on the back nine of his career. But then that kind of goes to question, how would you anticipate the Giants replacing him? Is it an internal replacement? I know we've talked a lot about Evan Neal already. Is he kicking inside and playing guard, or are we looking external free agency potentially to fill that gap?
I think Evan Neal is going to move into guard, but I don't think it's going to be right guard. A lot of fans might think naturally playing right tackle, you just shift over one position. I actually think it's more likely he moves over to left guard, because that's where he played in college for Alabama. He played a lot of left guard. He's never played right guard. If you look at where he's played across his career, college to the NFL, he's played left tackle, left guard, and right tackle, but he's never actually taken snaps at right guard. And one of the main problems with Evan Neal in his NFL career so far is that he's been learning a new position at right tackle. He was more comfortable playing on the left side in college, so moving to the right side has been a massive challenge for him. So I think that if they do move him into guard, it wouldn't be at the right side. It would be to the left side, pair him up with Andrew Thomas, and hope that playing alongside an elite left tackle makes the left guard better, who's been struggling at right tackle throughout his career. So Glowinski's replacement Is there anybody on the roster who could replace him? There is, although it's not the most likely solution. I think when you're looking at a guy like Josh Azidu, still needs more time to grow. He was a third-round pick for the Giants in 2022. He played this past season, had a lot of left tackle snaps, some left guard, and a little bit of right guard. They kind of move him around. Seems like the Giants don't know what they want to do with him yet. So I'm not sure that they're ready to make him a full-time starter at right guard. And then there's another fifth-round pick from that same draft, Marcus McKethan, also trying to develop him. I don't think he's ready to take on a starting job. So I think the most likely avenue here is that the New York Giants go into free agency and they spend big money on a guy like Michael Onwenu, whether they want to start him at right tackle or right guard. Maybe we're looking at Robert Hunt, or maybe we're going into the NFL draft. It's a pretty deep offensive line class. There are some talents that you could find in the second, third, and fourth rounds that should be day one starters for you. So the Giants definitely have a lot of options. However, the options on the roster, very unlikely to take over as the starter.
Absolutely. And I like the point you bring up about the draft. Usually guard is a position where you could find talent that could start outside of the first round. And this draft feels like you have options in the second, third, and even into the fourth round who could potentially come in and play right away for you on the interior, which is a great sign. But for me, I'm going to stick on the offensive line as well. The first guy I want to talk about is Laken Tomlinson. So a big cap number going into 2024 at $18.8 million. If they cut him, it would free up $8.14 million. Still 10.74 is a pretty high dead money hit. So I also think he's a restructure candidate. If you were to do that, you could save $8.5 million this year. Don't have to worry about any dead money. But for me, I think a big reason why I would prefer the cut option for Laken Tomlinson with the Jets is, honestly, I'd be looking to upgrade that position. I think he's been underwhelming since signing that big contract coming over from the San Francisco 49ers. You know, the Jets drafted Elijah Vera Tucker in 2021, and it seemed like the plan was going to be he was going to be their left guard of the future, you know, pair him next to Mekhi Becton. Unfortunately, we know how that one worked out. They're going to be looking for a new long-term option at left tackle. But the thought was he would be the left guard of the future. And then they go out that next year and sign Laken Tomlinson to big money, and they move AVT over to the right side of the line. So, and that really hasn't worked. He hasn't played at even a replacement level. I would say he's been below average as a starter for the Jets the last 2 years. So with this, both one free agent class of guards, I kind of like, and something we've talked about too, I kind of like the interior options on the line in free agency more than I like some of the tackle options. And then number two, you know, the Jets have a third round pick 72 that I absolutely think is in range where they could find someone in the draft that could come in and maybe play for you right away. And I think you could find a cheaper option in free agency that should be an upgrade. So I would be looking to upgrade over Laken Tomlinson. I know you have to eat a lot of dead money to cut him and move on from him, but you know, in a window where you're supposed to be going all in, I think it would be worth it.
And I agree with you. I think the cap savings there makes the move a no-brainer. And this is a player that Giants fans really wanted back in 2021 or 22 when he was a free agent. I know that there were a lot of Giants fans saying it's too bad that the Jets beat us out and got Laken Tomlinson, solid left guard during his time with the San Francisco 49ers. Everybody thought that he would continue to play at a high level, but you're right, since signing with the New York Jets, he hasn't played at a high level. He's been below a replacement level. And honestly, looking at the stats, I'm on PFF right now, 2023 for Tomlinson. This guy put up edge rusher numbers, 51 pressures and 7 sacks. That's like an edge rusher going into free agency and getting a $15 million contract. And he's a left guard with those numbers. So not exactly the prettiest sight there. I think this is a no-brainer. This is one of the best ways for the Jets to create some cap space this offseason.
Absolutely. I'm right there with you. Be looking for an upgrade on what was just an abysmal left side of it. Well, really the whole line stunk, but the left side in particular was a really big problem for the Jets last year. How about going back to your Giants? What's another name that jumps out to you as a cut candidate here?
Yeah, I'm going to throw one out there that might surprise some people, and this ties into what we were talking about with the scouting combine. You mentioned some trades start to leak out and form there. One of those last year was Darren Waller, the New York Giants. GM Joe Schoen was in discussions with the Las Vegas Raiders at the combine, had a conversation about Darren Waller and decided we were going to make a move for him, agreed to the third round pick later on, made the deal at the opening of free agency. But after 1 year, Darren Waller hasn't really made the impact the Giants were hoping for him to. When you're looking at Waller and the way that he's played this past year, it's a season marred by injuries, as much of his career has been. When Waller is on the field, absolutely great player. However, getting him on the field, it's been a real struggle. A lot of injuries. The hamstring injury has been nagging. He has nerve damage in his hamstring. So we're getting to a point now where Darren Waller's 32 years old, only scored 1 touchdown this past season, played only half the year. Can the Giants reasonably continue to allocate that much money to a player, $14 million cap hit for a player that likely doesn't give you 10 starts in a season? It doesn't make much sense. And the only reason why the New York Giants won't cut this player is because they just don't have talent on offense. I mean, we all know how bad this offense was. But there is a player that I like, Daniel Bellinger. He's going into his 3rd season now as a rookie. He looked pretty solid. I mean, he was the Giants starting tight end. He took on that role. He scored touchdowns when he needed to. He was an impact player in the playoffs versus Minnesota. I like Daniel Bellinger, and I think that he deserves more of an opportunity to develop and become the full-time starter. And having him play behind a guy like Darren Waller, who's just the least reliable player on the team, it doesn't make much sense to me. So if the Giants are able to add some reinforcements to their offense, create some playmaking talent for the lineup in free agency, I think that could be combined with the cap savings of Darren Waller. You cut him free, knowing that even if you pay him and you keep him this season, he's probably not playing much for you anyway. So you might as well just take that money and allocate it elsewhere.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one. I know that's kind of, I guess, a bold take in a way. Like, I feel like that's not a name that you get seen tossed around a ton. But the injuries and availability is such an important factor with these guys. And I guess my only pushback on it would be something that you brought up is the Giant, like they just they don't have a ton of talent offensively right now. But tight end, I feel like that's a position where you should be able to replace that kind of production for, a cheaper and healthier option. And that's usually something too in the draft where you can find talent outside the first round. Like, I'm not saying the Giants have to draft Brock Bowers at 6 or anything like that, but you like Bellinger. I think he's an option who could potentially play, get some more playing time, and then either bring in. There's a ton of veterans hitting the market that could be on the cheaper side. Hunter Henry's a name that jumps out. I think it's just steady, solid, reliable tight end. Like, who knows? So I'm with you on that. It would be intriguing to see them move off. I don't think they do it, but that's kind of like an outside the box thought on how the Giants could create some more cap space for themselves.
Yeah, and really the only reason not to is just because you don't want to open up another hole on this roster. There's holes everywhere, and you don't want to create another need for you. But the way that I see it, tight end is a need because Darren Waller doesn't play enough to make it not be a need.
There we go. So I'm going to look at this 2 for 2. I'm going to go with the tight end also and talk about CJ Uzama on the New York Jets. A big cap hit coming in 2024, $11.2 million. If the Jets were to cut him, it would free up $5.3 million. It was fairly obvious by the end of the year that he was the 3rd best tight end on this roster. Tyler Conklin, solid, steady production there. And then the young guy, Jeremy Ruckert, who the Jets took in the 3rd round of the 2022 draft, surpassed him on the roster. He was the much better run blocker. He was probably the best run blocking tight end that the Jets have on their roster. And for me, this is a no-brainer cut. You're not going to carry a 3rd tight end that has an $11 million cap hit, not nearly the same guy that he was in Cincinnati. And something that was always a strength with Uzama was his blocking ability, but that's something that's gotten worse over the last 2 years. I know he's a veteran guy, and Rodgers usually likes those veteran guys and maybe feels comfortable with him, but I think you could move on and find a much cheaper option to be tight end 3. Hell, even someone like Kenny Yeboah, who's a undrafted free agent that they had the last couple years, played at a better rate than CJ Uzama did this past year. I don't think he's worth it. I guess theoretically you could restructure him, but I don't think that's worthwhile. I would just cut and move on.
I'm in the same boat as you. I think that cap hit is completely unreasonable for a player of this caliber. He's not providing you much at all. He's getting up there in age. He's 31 years old. CJ Uzoma, I mean, listen, there was a time where he was a top tight end in this NFL and he was a starter. That time has clearly passed. And if he's not providing you much of anything in the receiving game, you're hoping that he's providing a hell of a lot in the running game as a blocker. And even there, you're looking at it, he hasn't been doing that. So I don't think that this is a player worth keeping, especially at that price point. I wouldn't restructure him because then really what you're doing is prolonging the inevitable. He's going to be on this team for an additional season, and you don't need him. So you mentioned it. The draft, you can find mid-round talents at the tight end spot. It's not that hard to do, and in fact, it's why you so rarely see tight ends go in the first and second rounds, because the hit rate on them in the third, fourth, fifth rounds, plus the contractual value of those players, so much greater when you land those players in those middle rounds at tight end. So I think that this is also a no-brainer.
Absolutely, I'm with you there. So, anyone else on the Giants that are jumping out to you?
There's one that jumps out to me, but I'm going to say I'm totally against cutting Darius Slayton. Darius Slayton is the other one that has a large cap savings if he is cut. His cap number is at $8 million. They can cut him and free up $6.4 million. However, Slayton, he's been the Giants' best receiver for years. I mean, the consistency there is pretty incredible. It's been a bad team. It's been a lot of bad quarterback play. Even still, Darius Slayton continues to put up 500 to 700, 800 yards every season, about 5 to 7 touchdowns every season. The guy is just always there. He's always available. He's always banged up at the same time, but he gets his ass on the field and he makes plays. And he's one of those players that, yeah, maybe $8 million might feel like a lot, but if you're looking at the direction of this wide receiver market and the way that it's moved the past several seasons, this is one of the biggest bargain contracts in the NFL, in my opinion. I think that this is an excellent deal for Darius Slayton, and the Giants would be fools to cut him this offseason.
Yeah, if you're going to get 700 yards from an $8 million guy, I think you sign up for that every single time. And I think part of the problem with the Giants is they probably have him slotted a little bit higher than what he should be as a receiver. And if you get in a little bit more talent and drop him down, suddenly your wide receiver room looks a little bit more well-rounded, because you're not relying on him essentially to be your best wide receiver. He's a number 2 or 3 option for you at that point, with some of the emergence of the young talent. And then, like I said, who knows, maybe you either add another receiver in the draft or pay someone big in free agency, and you go about it that way. But I always kind of like Darius Slayton as, again, like a role player. I'm not saying he's a stud number 1 receiver, but you need guys like Darius Slayton who could come in and produce for you. And as you said, the $8.1 million, or 8.2 if you round up, is really not bad for a wide receiver of his caliber. Yes, injuries do kind of creep into his game every so often, but again, if you look at his numbers, he's playing more often than not. He doesn't miss a lot of time. So he's playing through these injuries and playing at a high level. So I like that. I think that's a good call out from you.
Yeah, and I think if anything, I would extend Darius Slayton. They extended him last year on that 2-year deal. He was ready to leave for Atlanta. I believe he took less money to stay with the New York Giants rather than going to Atlanta. I wouldn't let that opportunity rise to an occasion again. I would just extend him, if anything, if I'm the New York Giants, because what you said there is absolutely true. If the Giants had a WR1, a primary receiving threat, Darius Slayton's numbers as that secondary guy with 50 receptions, 770 yards, and 4 touchdowns the past season, I mean, those are great numbers for a WR2. Which is the fact is, this offense is so bad. He's our WR1. If the Giants can find themselves that primary receiving threat, whether it be in free agency or in the draft, like a Malik Neighbors steps in, becomes a 1,000-yard receiver instantly, well, then you have Slayton putting up 700 yards. Now your offense is pretty dynamic.
Absolutely. And the last guy that I want to bring up is not necessarily a cut candidate, although some people think it would be wise to cut him, but I'm going to say a restructure candidate for the New York Jets, and that's John Franklin Myers. He's coming in. It would be a $16 million cap hit this year, but you could restructure it and save $9.2 million. And, for me, again, this is a guy who I think is kind of still, all these years later, an underrated piece to this Jets defense. Yes, he's not going to put up the numbers of, a Bryce Huff or a Quinnen Williams on the interior, or even, maybe not a Jermaine Johnson, but he's one of your better run defending edges. He's also someone who's going to usually give you somewhere between 5 and 7 sacks in a season, and just be a nice complementary piece. And, the Jets calling card on the defense is they like to rotate these guys a ton. And I don't think you should necessarily be robbing from that in order to, help your cap situation. Yes, it's obvious that all these teams are trying to get more cap, and the Jets need help on the offense. And, a lot of people say, oh, cut some of these guys on the defensive line. Don't pay Bryce Huff and use that money on offense. And my pushback would be, I think there's a world where you can do both, where you could restructure guys like JFM, where you could keep Bryce Huff and structure the contract in a way where, the cap hit isn't so bad in the first couple of years, and also add to the wide receiver room and the offensive line. And, for me, 28 years old, still a productive player, still a quality starter in this league, even if he's not a star, I don't think I'd be moving on from that.
Yeah, and I'll say this is a guy who probably shouldn't have the fifth highest cap number on your team. However, I also feel like this is a player that the Jets can't afford to lose because they're very likely to lose Bryce Huff this offseason. At least that's how I feel. It seems
Yep.
like more and more the steam is getting picked up where teams are interested in him, and the Jets are not one of those teams that are prioritizing Bryce Huff in free agency. So if you're going to lose Bryce Huff, you mentioned it. The Jets love rotation in their defense, especially in the pass rushing game. John Franklin Myers as a rotational pass rusher putting up, like you said, 3 to 5 to 7 sacks a season, but also with 50 total pressures this past year. He's had 50 or more pressures in each of his last 4 years with the Jets. So, as a rotational guy, not much more you can ask for than 50 pressures and 5 to 7 sacks per year. That's kind of like the perfect production. Now, again, you're kind of overpaying for that production. I think that this is starting level money and you're getting a rotational level guy. However, maybe he ascends into a larger role here with Bryce Huff departing. Maybe you see more from John Franklin Myers. He's still young, only in the fifth season of his career, entering the sixth. He's 27. Who's to say that he can't take another step forward and continue to play at maybe even at a higher level with Bryce Huff departing? I think that's totally possible. So with Bryce Huff likely out of here, I think John Franklin Myers is a player you can't afford to lose.
Absolutely. And this is also a name too. And every team has guys like this where if you just like go through and like check the box score, he might not exactly jump out at you. But if you're watching the team religiously and watching tape, like he's someone who stands out. Maybe the box score production isn't exactly there. So as you mentioned, is he a $16 million player? No. Is he closer to like that $12 million, which is where the AAV of his deal is? Probably, yeah. But if you restructure it and get that number down to essentially $8 million against the cap, I'd be much more willing to do that. So I think that's the move there. Anyone else on the Giants standing out to you, or you want to get into some salary cap stuff?
I'm ready to dive into the salary cap stuff. The only thing I'll say before we dive into that is in terms of restructuring players, I think it's great in theory, but not always great in practice. So it's kind of on topic, but a little off topic because the Giants do have a couple of restructure candidates as well. Like Daniel Jones is one that you'll see Giants fans say restructure his contract. You can free up $25 million. It's the worst thing in the world to do because it just pushes that guaranteed money down the line and then you can't cut them. So I think with John Franklin Myers, the only pushback that you would hear from some Jets fans is, if you restructure that, then you can't get out of his deal next year if he totally stinks or if he takes a step backwards. And I know that's how Giants feel about certain other players. Again, Daniel Jones, we could restructure Andrew Thomas, Dexter Lawrence, free up money, but those guys are going to be mainstays. They're going to be here for the long run. So I'm happy to restructure those deals. But I just think that you got to throw a little caution to the wind here with restructuring players sometimes. It can be a good move, but it's kind of one of those moves that you want to make sparingly.
Absolutely. Good call. And speaking of the cap, let's get into it. The NFL salary cap had a pretty dramatic increase up to, what are we at, 252 and change now after this dramatic increase. Again, about roughly $10 to $12 million more than what was originally anticipated. Have to imagine this helps out, well, every single team in the league, but in particular, the Jets and the Giants, who definitely need to be adding talent and could use the additional cap space to do that.
Yeah, the Giants are now looking at around $30 million in cap space to open up free agency. And that's before they make some of these cuts that we mentioned and some of those restructurings. So the Giants could realistically balloon that number up towards 60, maybe even higher. I think they could put that number up near 70 to $80 million if they really want to crunch the numbers and free up a lot of cap space. So this is a big deal. We got to say thanks to Taylor Swift for this. She brought in a lot of new fans to the NFL. It brought in a lot of advertising to the NFL, and it made them a lot more money than they anticipated this past season. Obviously, being kind of removed from COVID has helped a lot for the NFL as well. This is time for this league to really expand and start paying players more, start opening up new avenues. I mean, the cap rising this much, not to, take it too far off topic, but this could be steps towards 10 years from now, there being expansion teams. And we're actually having teams in Europe like the NFL has been wanting to do for a very long time. So this is really important for the NFL in general, but for the New York Giants and the New York Jets, it just makes it easier for them to move their cap around a little bit and not feel pressured, not feel like they have to cut this player or cut that player. Maybe they hold on to a player that they were kind of 50-50 on now. But the overall effect of this on the Jets and Giants, those players like Xavier McKinney, who the Giants want to retain, but they're going to have to retain him at a high price point. Well, his price point probably just went up. He said, okay, the cap went up, so now my asking price has gone up a little bit. And I think that's going to be kind of the negative effect. We're going to talk about the positive effects, of course, because there's more money for everybody to spend, but that also means that there's more money for players to ask for, which is good for the players, but for the teams individually, it is going to become a little bit of a challenge.
Absolutely. And 255.4 was the number. Have it up on over the cap here. As you called out, Giants 30.6 million in cap space. That could change with some of these restructures and cuts. Jets at 12.7, but with some simple restructures and some cuts, that number can get upwards of $40 million. So I'm really interested, for me anyway, to see what cap casualties we get, not only from the Jets and the Giants, but just around the league, right? For teams to continue to build up and get more cap. And then how high do these contracts go? Like, I don't think anyone was expecting, the cap to go up this much. I think this is why I got the numbers mixed up. I believe it was 242 million. That was the projected cap hit. And then almost $13 million increases over what it was actually projected to be is insane. But who do you think, like, I guess either who or what positional group do you think increases or has the most impact, or this has the most impact on?
I think this has a pretty big impact on the quarterback position. And I'll say that because last year, Daniel Jones signed that contract and kind of ruined the quarterback market forever. You can be an average quarterback who has a couple good games. And because it's so hard to find the quarterback who's average and has a couple good games, you can get paid like an elite quarterback at the end of your rookie contract. So with this cap going up, with Daniel Jones having that contract, and now if you're Baker Mayfield, for example, going into free agency, you're saying, okay, my floor now is the Daniel Jones contract. And you know what? Add on the 12% or whatever, the cap just rose to that. And that's what I want. And now you're going to have like Dak Prescott coming off of this MVP year. And he just said, okay, I had a great campaign. I'm due for another contract. Give me this plus this percentage. I want more now because of the salary cap. So it's really going to have a trickle-down effect on all the positions. It's going to hit quarterback first and foremost because there are some big contracts to be handed out this offseason. But then going forward, when you're looking at the Jets and the Giants situations in particular, pass rusher is a big one. It's becoming more and more valuable. I think that Micah Parsons is in the conversation to be the first $40 million per year defensive player. Once that happens next season, or if that contract gets done this offseason, the price for all defenders is going to go up, and especially edge rushers and pass rushers. So there's going to be a trickle-down effect here across the NFL. And one of the positions that I'm most curious to see how it affects the Giants is a running back and maybe safety as well, because the Giants do have Saquon Barkley as an impending free agent. They have Xavier McKinney as an impending free agent. Giants are reportedly not expected to offer Saquon the same offer that they gave him last year, which he rejected. They're going to lower that asking price. But maybe now they don't have to because the salary cap went up. It's kind of a tricky thing here where if they were going to lower it by that percentage and now the cap went up by that percentage, well, they can give him the contract that they offered last year because it's not worth as much as it was last year. So the running back position, safety position for the Giants in particular, I'm curious to see how this affects those spots. I know McKinney wants top 5 money. What does that look like now with all of the salary cap movement? It remains to be seen, but it's definitely going to have a severe impact on both of these teams' free agency plans.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you called out running back also, because while, it feels like the obvious one is quarterback, right? Because that's everyone's, they get paid the most. And now there's talks like Dak Prescott, it's going to reset or blow up the quarterback, market, which that sounds kind of crazy, but you bring up a good point where like it's so hard to find a good starting quarterback. And if you're an average to above average starter, you're going to get paid like an elite guy. And someone like Dak Prescott has the ability to blow up a market like that, seemingly is kind of crazy, but that's just the way that it's going. But specifically for the running back, like that's a position, especially this past offseason, I feel like it was such a big story was because there was a lot of bigger names on the market and none of them were getting these huge deals. It was all like 1-year deals, franchise tags, and things like that. So I think that's the position where I'm most curious to see how much of an increase it gets. Like I'm looking at PFF right now. I could pull up the tab and show it. Like they're projecting Saquon Barkley's contract at 3 years, 12.25 million, which, correct me if I'm wrong, that's around what they offered him last time, right? Wasn't it like 4 for 12?
Yeah, they offered him, I believe the deal was $13 million per season. He didn't like the guaranteed money in the deal, so he ultimately rejected it, but that's about the right AAV. And I'm going to build on that point that you made, bringing up PFF and what they're projecting. If you go over to Spot Rack, which they take into account players who signed contracts coming off of similar seasons to Saquon Barkley's production and his year-to-year production, they have his market value at $9.9 million on average annual salary. So It's a pretty significant difference. So I'm curious to see where Barkley actually lands here, because if you're paying that 12.25, it almost feels like you're probably paying for the name. But if you're paying for the production, you're going to get closer to that spot rack value, which is right under 10 million. But then again, that's not factoring in the new salary cap space. So I'm not exactly sure where he lands, but it's going to be really interesting to see how those negotiations go. And they were beginning and now this week at the combine.
Yeah, absolutely. And like Saquon's not the only, there's a lot of big name running backs hitting the market. Like Josh Jacobs is hitting the market again, Derrick Henry, Tony Pollard, Austin Eckler. A lot of it is name recognition. And like at this point in some of these guys' careers, like you kind of worry how much is left in the tank still at this point. But I don't know if Saquon, slightly off topic, but I'm going to ask it anyway. If Saquon's not back with the Giants, is there a team that you could see ponying up and spending that money to bring him in?
He's been connected to a few teams. I think the Texans stand out. They want to add some more talent, especially in that backfield, give CJ Stroud another weapon, and hopefully try and make a playoff run next season. I know that Jim Harbaugh has been open about his interest in Saquon Barkley, so the Chargers are another landing spot. And then if you want to look in the NFC, I think that one team that does stand out is the Dallas Cowboys. I think that there's a great chance that they look at the Giants and say, okay, this has been the one player that the Giants have had that we've had to game plan for over the past 5 years. Let's take him away from them. Let's make them game plan for him, and let's let him get some revenge on this team that didn't give him the contract that he felt he deserved. And they have the money. Tony Pollard's going to be a free agent. They might decide, okay, let's invest in Saquon Barkley rather than Tony Pollard. It's kind of 50-50 whether or not that's a good idea for them, but it is something that we've seen floated around quite a bit in the rumor mill. And honestly, because Jerry Jones is not afraid to invest in the running back position, I could totally see it happening.
Yeah, I was just going to say that feels like something Jerry Jones would do. One, because he's invested in that position before, and two, like feels like anytime he could try to stick it to the Giants, like that's something that he's going to do. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Like, I don't know, he's not always the wisest of GMs with his decision making, but I could totally see him doing something like that. And just while we're on the position, before we get back to some other, Jets Giants things with this impact, like the Jets very well could be in the market for an RB2 behind Breece Hall this year. They have Izzy Abanikanda, who they drafted last year, but I'm not really sold that he's shown enough that you could be comfortable with him going into the season as RB2. So I think they're definitely in the market for adding another running back, although I don't think it's going to be a bigger name guy like Saquon or Derrick Henry or Tony Pollard, like the route that they went last year with bringing in more of the name in Dalvin Cook. I could kind of see them adding like, I don't know, like J.K. Dobbins. I know he's coming off the injury, but he had a good relationship with Aaron Rodgers in their Achilles rehab. Like that's a name I could totally see them bringing in. His AAV is like a 1 year, $2 million projection. DeAndre Swift is another one who's hitting the market. Like that'd be an interesting name, I think, anyway. He's still only 25 years old. So, I worry about paying some of the running backs like 27 plus, but someone at 25 feels like they still have a couple good years left. But yeah, like that's sneaky a position that the Jets are going to be in on, not at the higher point of the market, but looking to add, some depth at that position too.
Yeah, and I'll throw out a few other names that I'm looking at here on Spot Rack. Antonio Gibson could be a good one. Washington Commanders, nice receiving back as well. AJ Dillon is going towards the free agency market. I don't think that he'd be necessarily an option. I like J.K. Dobbins. That was a good one that you pointed out to kind of pinpoint. And then on DeAndre Swift, I'll mention that I think he's a great fit for the New York Giants if they do lose out on Saquon Barkley. Swift to me is a guy who his mileage is still pretty low. He's 25, and I think that there's more in the tank. And he's really only getting started. If he gets signed by the New York Giants and put into that starting role and is told like, hey, you're the succession plan here for Saquon Barkley, let's see what you can do. I think Swift makes a lot of sense. And I think that he would be more affordable, of course, than Saquon Barkley, probably on the higher end of the market, but still for the Giants, they'd be saving a lot of money by going with the DeAndre Swift over a Saquon Barkley in free agency.
Yeah, honestly, I think that would be worth it for the Giants. I know, Saquon, you drafted him homegrown guy in a way, but I think, younger chance for that there's more upside there. So I'm with you there. But something else that I want to call out with the salary cap increases, and I think is a good point, is some of these for both the Jets and the Giants. It feels like the fan base has these guys where it almost feels inevitable that they're going to lose that player. And for the Jets, that's Bryce Huff. And for me, I'm wondering if this increased salary cap kind of maybe changes the minds of these teams. We're like, oh, okay, we have this additional almost $13 million. Can we figure out a way to keep some of these guys? And from the Jets' perspective, for Bryce Huff, we mentioned it with JFM, like the calling card of the Jets is they have a great defensive line that they rotate a lot, gets pressure, and they have shutdown corners. Like that's their recipe for success on defense. And they're built, even with Aaron Rodgers, they're still built around that defense, and they just need Rodgers to be an average to slightly above average quarterback. And you're hoping that that's enough of an increase with improved offensive line play to get the Jets offense functional. And then you're still riding this awesome defense. And for me, I know we've talked about it a few times already on this show early on, but I have a hard time in an all-in year letting your best pass rusher walk. And with this salary cap increase, I would really take a hard look and see if I could find a way to keep him and also improve on the offensive side of the ball.
I'm in agreement with you. And listen, taking my bias aside, right? Because as a Giants fan, I want to see Bryce Huff hit the open market because I think that he makes sense for them. I'm still 50-50 on it. As we discussed, in a previous episode, I feel like he's going to be one of those signings that it looks like the Giants would just love to sign this player. Like he fits the mold perfectly, but there is some risk involved with him. But for the Jets, you know what you have in him. Like he's been your guy for the past several years. You've developed him. He's still growing in the eyes of everybody else in the league. Why is that not the case for the Jets? Why do they not view him as a guy who you sign him to a contract now, and in a couple of years from now, it's a bargain because he's going to continue to develop? That's how other fans view this player, right? So, and I think it's tough when certain teams have their own player and try to evaluate their own player. Sometimes they're way too harsh on their own players because they remember, kind of the shortcomings way more than a Giants fan. I don't know exactly any of the shortcomings of Bryce Huff. I just know the upside is there, the contractual value is there. Like there's a lot of things to like, and I think that it's really tough for some fans or some teams when they start to kind of nitpick their own players and put them into a little bit of a box. And I think that might be what's happening with Bryce Huff. That's what I feel like is happening with Giants fans and Xavier McKinney. Yep. Giants fans are failing to realize Xavier McKinney is only 24 years old. He's already this good. He had a really up and down 2022 season. He had missed a lot of time with injury. Giants fans haven't really forgiven him for that. But if you look at what he did in 2023 and throughout the rest of his career, and he's only 24 years old, younger than a lot of rookies entering the class this year. Like this is a guy that it's a no-brainer. Everybody wants to pay him except Giants fans. Like Eagles fans are constantly on Fireside Giants Twitter, tweeting at us and saying, give us to him, or give him to us. And so I think that that's kind of what's happening here with the Giants and Xavier. I think that's what's happening with the Jets and Bryce Huff. You got to kind of look around the league, see how other teams are valuing this player, and then kind of figure out why do you not value him the same way? Maybe the Jets really should value him that way.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you brought up McKinney because I was going to say that feels like that's the Giants version of this. This is a guy who, again, you drafted the second round in 2020 and has had two really stellar seasons in 2021, missed time in 22, as you said, but was one of the better safeties in the league last year. Again, that feels like a no-brainer. And if you could make it work, why not? Like, again, I've been just you pulling up the PFF ones. I don't know if you still have Spot Rack open, but they're projecting a 4-year, $13.5 million AAV deal for Xavier McKinney. If that's what it would take to keep him, I think, again, that's a no-brainer for me.
Yeah, that's definitely a no-brainer. I think a lot of Giants fans would feel that way, but realistically, he's probably pushing up towards that top 5 of the safety market, which is going to put him at least at 16 million AAV. I'm comfortable with that. I don't think that there's really any reason why Giants fans should get up in arms over 13 versus 16 million. It's a $3 million difference. It's not that huge. And in fact, I know that the top of the safety market is Derwin James at 19 million. That also doesn't bother me. Again, Xavier McKinney is 24. He's this good now. How good can he be once he hits 26, 27, those prime years of his career? And even then, he's going to be due for another contract by then. I mean, by the time this contract expires, he's not even going to be 30 years old. He's still going to have time to continue to grow and develop and be a great player for you. This is a guy that the Giants should be looking at and saying he's in our 10-year plans. That's how I feel about him. I think he's one of our team's best players, and he's only scratching the surface. And another factor to consider here is he's been this good with just about zero help around him. The Giants secondary has been really bad the past couple of years. He hasn't had a good running mate at safety. So when Giants fans take a look at PFF grades or, just generally speaking, fans look at PFF grades, You got to bring in context to things like that. And there's a lot of variance to those grades. And in particular, when you're looking at the safety position, go look at a trend of good safeties playing with bad safeties in the starting lineup. It lowers their PFF grade to play alongside someone who's not nearly as good as them. And that's what's been happening to Xavier McKinney. And even still, he's been posting incredible numbers, 116 combined tackles this past season, only missed 5 tackles on the year. The guy does it all for the defense. He lines up everywhere. He's one of those players, to me, you pay him. He's one of those rare special talents that you find in the second round, and you know that you have to create a role for him in your defense for a very long time. That's how I feel. And that might be how you feel about Bryce Huff. Maybe not as strongly, because I really do think that Xavier McKinney is a top 5 player at his position in the NFL. I don't know if anybody's quite there with Bryce Huff. But again, looking at age and potential included in this, you got to know that these players are still growing and developing. So whatever you sign them for now, give it 3 years. It's probably going to be some pretty good value.
Yeah, and look, I'm not going to say Bryce Huff's a top 5 player at his position, but I do think it's a comparable comparison, really, because they're both guys. They're 25 years old. They're getting better, as you said. Like, this was the best season that McKinney's had. This is the best year Bryce Huff's had. The difference is, obviously, with Huff, he hasn't been that regular player. Like, he played the most amount of snaps this year in his career. It was 40%, and he still had, over 10 sacks. So I think the argument with Huff is a little bit more projection. Like, if you give him more of a role, he will produce even more for you. And then the pushback on not paying Huff is, well, is he going to be able to do it in the bigger role? Or, the Jets rotate so much. Is it really worth it to pay him if he's not going to play, the 60% of snaps, let's say, and get you 15 sacks? For me, I think it would be worth it, because I look at him in a similar way that, like a Shaq Barrett, who came on later in his career, or Hassan Reddick, who was kind of a rotational player early on, wasn't in the right situation, and then gets more playing time and thrives with it. I think, we saw his snaps go up from 20 something percent to 40 and saw a massive increase in production. Why not an extra? The Jets aren't playing any of their defensive line 80% of the time. If he's playing 55% of the time, can he give you 14 sacks or something like that? And, if you're playing with more leads in 2024 than you were in 2023, you're going to be in more advantageous situations in the fourth quarter of games and be able to, let your pass rush close out these games. So for me, I think it's worth it. And that's what makes it comparable. Like, again, not saying, Huff is a top 5 edge rusher. That's a bit much for me, but I think he's, extremely productive in the role that he's been given. He was productive when they essentially doubled his snap count from 22 to 23. And I think if you continue to give him more, and on top of, when you're hoping, at least with, Aaron Rodgers, that you have more leads and you're looking to close out games in the fourth quarter, that's when I think you'll see his production and snap counts go up even higher.
Right. And I'll say I agree with you, but to play a little bit of devil's advocate to the situation, when you're looking at a guy that you want to pay, and a lot of it is projection, you're paying for potential. That is kind of what the Giants did with Daniel Jones, right? You're expecting Bryce Huff to continue to develop, take steps forward, get better. More playing time means more production. That's how the Giants felt about Daniel Jones. Not more playing time. Of course, he was still the starter, but they were like, okay, year 1 with Brian Dable, he got a lot better. He won a playoff game. Year 2 with Brian Dable, maybe he has that Josh Allen breakout, so we pay him $40 million per year, and really he takes that big step forward and looks like a $50 million per year player. Well, he took that step backwards, and now the Giants are regretting that decision. So that would be my concern with Bryce Huff. And that is my concern with Bryce Huff as a Giants fan. When the Giants are looking at maybe signing him in free agency, I'm going to say, listen, he's been great in this rotational role. I think he can handle it. I think he can move into a more prominent starting position and take that step forward. However, if he doesn't, you might be a little bit upset with the results, the same way that you were when you signed Daniel Jones based on his potential. So that would be the one kind of hesitancy that I would have about Bryce Huff.
Totally. I think that's totally fair. I'm excited for this week, Anthony, with the NFL scouting combine coming up. I'm sure on Thursday's episode, we'll have a lot more to get into, but just closing out this one, anything in particular you're really looking forward to this week at the combine?
I'm looking forward to watching the quarterbacks. I know a few of them have already said they're not going to throw, Caleb Williams being one of them, which is a real bummer because he's got an absolute rocket launcher of an arm. It's just fun watching him throw football. So I would have liked to see that. He doesn't need to, though. He's going to be the number one overall pick. So I understand it. Jaden Daniels not participating in drills does surprise me a little bit. It makes me a little bit nervous that this could be a Justin Fields situation where he feels like he's a top 3 lock and then maybe he slides because he didn't do some of those pre-draft workouts and combine stuff. But the main thing that I'm looking forward to, it's not necessarily how these quarterbacks throw and perform in these drills. It's what are the rumors that come about from them, right? Because every year we hear something about a quarterback like, oh, he failed this cognitive test. That's what happened with CJ Stroud. It locked him into the number 2 pick. That's all she wrote. Sometimes we'll hear this player showed up late to the meeting or bombed this meeting or was completely stellar in this meeting. Once we start hearing, okay, the Giants had this meeting with this quarterback, then we know, okay, this guy is on their draft board because to this point, the Giants have said, Daniel Jones is our starting quarterback. We're not really interested. But once we see them interviewing with a JJ McCarthy, maybe, then the rumors are going to start heating up like crazy. So I'm excited for that. I think combine meetings are more important than combine drills. So what I'm really looking forward to this upcoming week is seeing who the Giants and the Jets as well are meeting with at this combine and who might be rising up their draft boards.
Yeah, absolutely. The meetings are obviously huge and it gives you an idea, the kind of the direction that the team is going to want to go. Obviously, I know like some of the workout stuff doesn't really matter as much, but I love seeing like the RAS scores come out, and then you're like, oh, this guy's ranking. He has a high 9, and someone like a GM like Joe Douglas, for instance, he anytime on day 3, it feels like he just takes like those RAS score standouts. Like their last pick last year was Zach Kuntz, who's just like this freak tight end with insane size and insane athletic ability. So like, all right, trying to figure out which guys your GM is going to go after based on like RAS score and what they like. It's fun. It's exciting. Free agency and the draft is the next best thing outside the regular season. Love watching football, but it's so fun to kind of figure out what direction your team's going to go. And this kind of feels like the real start of it. So that's what I'm looking forward to.
100%. I'm in the same boat. And with those RAS scores, athleticism has been a point of emphasis for Joe Douglas, like you mentioned, Joe Shane as well. If you take a look at his history these past 2 years with the Giants, he's been targeting high-profile athletes, maybe not the most refined players at his position, but a guy like Deonte Banks, I thought he had a solid amount of refinement, but he also had, I think, the 3rd best RAS score ever for a cornerback in the combine. So those are definitely important things to keep a look at or keep an eye on and take a look at. And of course, those scores and everything are going to be determined this upcoming week. So it's going to be an exciting time.
Love it. So that's going to do it for us on this episode. We'll be back later in the week talking about the scouting combine. Before you go, please make sure to leave a like on the video. Subscribe if you're new to the channel. Subscribe to Anthony, his main channel, and then Fireside Giants. Me, I got my channel, Matt O'Leary NY, and then also doing stuff over on Talking Jets as well. So ton of content, Jets and Giants coming out. Hopefully you're liking the new Jet Giant New York football show. We're still growing this thing, so really excited to continue this going. But for now, that's going to do it. I'm Matt. He's Anthony, and we'll catch you next time.